From our studios here in Scottsdale, Arizona, where the weather is always beautiful, this is Retirement News Online, where we talk about things about retirement. And you can also find out more at retirementnewsonline.com. And today we are talking about something every young entrepreneur should be thinking about far earlier than they usually do: how to build wealth in a way that minimizes taxes and maximizes flexibility for the future. Because too often, founders focus only on growing revenue while overlooking strategies that can help protect and preserve what they're building. And joining us today is a founder, strategic asset advisor, Nareena, founder of Titan Capital Strategies in Bethesda, Maryland, and with a background in managing institutional level portfolios and now helping entrepreneurs develop smarter capital and tax strategies. Nareena really works with business owners to create financial structures designed for long-term success. And Nareena, as an entrepreneur yourself and a business owner, a lot of times they're focused on growth, that taxes become kind of an afterthought, right? Everything is going into the business and they're just worried about growing, but taxes is part of that whole computation, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's a huge part that people really don't think about early on. They're so focused on growth in the early stages. They're building, scaling, reinvesting, which makes sense, right? But what they find is that years later, they've amassed all this wealth, and they've also amassed a lot of taxes. So it becomes very important to think about strategic asset positioning before any taxable event. We call that structured capital, right? So when done correctly, they find that their wealth is a lot more tax efficient. Versus not. And so most folks don't think about it early on. And half the problem is they're not educated on it. So it's really learning about that there are beyond mainstream, financial strategies and taking the time to learn about it very early on.
And so when we're talking then about tax-free wealth strategies, which is something that is really helpful for business owners especially, what are some of the misconceptions they have about what actually is possible?
So I think first thing is they're not aware that there are possibilities, right? Just because what's presented in the mainstream. Number two is they often think, oh, it's too good to be true, right? But what they don't know is that there are tax codes that have existed for decades. They're fully legal, and again, it comes down to education. Another misconception I hear often is, oh, it's meant for the billionaires or for the ultra family, or for those private equity guys, right? We don't know anything about it. And so unless they're exposed to family office type of conversations, or the crowds of Tiger 21, that's when their mind really opens up. I think third is they think their accountants, CPAs, are handling everything, right?
Probably
and
not.
Please don't get me wrong. I mean, they're extremely important, but they're tax filers. They're not tax strategists, right? And strategic positioning, sophisticated planning asks the question, how do I structure my capital before any taxable event happens, right? I'll give you a very simple example. I have a client who owns NVIDIA, and he got it pennies on the dollar, right? He's in his late 60s. He has over 20 million. And he wants to liquidate it, but he feels completely stuck because if he does, that's going to trigger massive taxes. So what does he end up doing? Nothing, right?
Right.
And so he didn't know that, right? So these are very common misconceptions, and we're working through how to structure that capital before he decides to liquidate.
Well, and guys, that is such an interesting situation, an example. Talk about just some considerations there. Give me an example of how you would minimize taxes on that.
Yeah, so again, the most important is positioning those assets before any exit, sale, or liquidity, all right? That's the first step. Second is then being able to reposition those assets where you can minimize, even eliminate the capital gains taxes. And so when people are educated on that, they're like, what? How did I not know about this? And then they can reposition those assets into more protected structures where they have access to liquidity. It's compounding, and it's really working for them.
Okay, that makes sense. You know, I'd love to get into specifics about that, but let's talk about like founders like yourself. You know, and I don't know if you're in this situation, but you're constantly, I mean, they are constantly reinvesting into their business. You know, how do you balance growth, you know, today with protecting wealth in the future, because there's so many challenges or headwinds sometimes? I mean, this is an interesting example right now. You know, markets are booming right now. Earnings, you know, the second quarter up 20%. We didn't really expect that, but that can go up and down, up
Absolutely.
and down. You know, how do you manage all that?
So the first thing is, it doesn't have to be, you have to decide between growth and protection. The goal should be balance, right? And so it's creating various buckets for yourself that's tax deferred and tax free, right? And that's going to allow you a lot of control, flexibility, and protection, right? And those are very fancy jargons. What I find is a lot of entrepreneurs, when they're more mature in their business, those words makes a lot of sense. Again, getting back to my client, NVIDIA, right? Investor. He felt stuck, right? If he had structured it properly years ago, he would have amassed a lot more wealth, you know, and have had access to it. So again, it's really important to create buckets of balance between growth, flexibility, and protection.
You obviously know a great deal about this because you're a business owner yourself, but it's really an interesting conversation. Nareena, thank you so much. That's Nareena Khan with Titan Capital Strategies right there in Bethesda, Maryland. That's a good spot to be. Right there near all the policy and all the decisions that are being made around the country. You can find out more at retirementnewsonline.com and check her out at Titan Capital Strategies in Bethesda. Thanks for watching.